it's Lauren, and welcome back to our second episode of Social Workers on Fire. And so we ended our last episode talking about hinting at why social workers in the fire department and what do we do, how did we get here. And so I have with me today Chief Holloway, who is our EMS chief, to kind of explain all of that background stuff. So welcome, Chief Holloway.
Well, good morning. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So tell us, how long have you been with the fire department?
So this June, I will have 28 years in the fire service.
Okay. And so as the EMS chief, what all does your position entail?
So I think you may have talked about it on the first podcast that in a fire department, of course, we fight fires and we have fires and every day. That fires are always going to be with us. That's why we exist. That's why we have a fire department. But today, in 2024, the majority of our calls that we respond on are EMS in nature. They're emergency medical calls. And that's not just us, that's any fire department in anywhere you go, volunteer fire department or a paid department anywhere. That's going to be the case. That's becoming more and more common. So with my position, it's actually a division chief position, so to say. I'm over everything that has to do with EMS. We have over 200 firefighters here, and they're all at least the basic EMT level. We've got over 100 paramedics that are trained to a little higher level, and we make basic response. We do advanced level response. We do everything. We're a full service EMS department. We also are capable of transport. We have 3 transport units that we can utilize if needed. But we also have an ambulance company in town, which is a private company that we have franchised to handle our transports to the hospital. So there's oversight that has to happen with that. And that is a big part of my job, is to handle the oversight for the North Star franchise, and also to maintain our licensure, to make sure all of our people are getting their continuing education and what they need to do that, and just in general keeping the wheels running every day, so to say, in the EMS part of what we do.
Great. So tell me a little bit, how did you get to be EMS chief? What led you up to here? What were some other roles you were in?
Well, I may have mentioned this before, but when I first came to the fire service, of course, everybody comes in as an entry-level firefighter, and then there's the option for some people to go to paramedic school, and I took that option. Everybody here is a basic EMT, but I took the option when it was available to go to paramedic school. And when I went to paramedic school, uh, I learned a lot about uh, emergency medical care and what that entails and what we do with that. And so I progressed up through that, and I spent a lot of years on our rescue unit, uh, riding that truck. And then as I progressed through the ranks and became a driver, and then also a lieutenant, and then a captain, that uh, it's always part of our role because we make EMS calls.
Yeah. Okay. So sounds like you were on the line for quite some time. And so tell me, what kind of calls led to the beginning stages of this program?
So anybody will tell you that around 80% of our calls are EMS calls, and probably 70% of those 80% are what we would call low acuity calls. They are calls that are not, they're emergencies to the people. That people call 911 and it's an emergency to them, but it is not a high level emergency like a cardiac arrest or like a major trauma from a car accident or something like that. These are calls where people are just sick. They have need of primary care, and maybe they can't get to the doctor themselves, and they have no other option but to call 911. So those calls are increasing in number. And what happens is our units are growing more and more absorbed with going on those types of calls, and a lot of times they're not in service for the more serious calls. So we saw that as a problem and saw that we needed to address that.
So, since you saw that issue, what did you guys decide to do about it at that point?
Well, we thought of a lot of things. First of all, we thought about trying to treat the person outside of the hospital, try to keep the people at home, try to avoid the transport to the hospital. We started an alternative response program. This was back in 2014. We took paramedics and we put them in an SUV, and we had them listen to the radio and respond on these lower level emergencies and basically triage the call. And they were able to cancel our other units that were coming and just assist the ambulance company with the call, or sometimes cancel them as well because the problem could be handled just with one person. So we did that to begin with. We put those people on shift. It was one person per shift. And the other part of that was we wanted to try to address the long term problem of people calling 911. So we picked out 10 of our most loyal customers that we respond to, and we had our guys touch base with them at least 2 or 3 times a week to see how they were doing on a non-emergent basis, just to make sure they had what they needed, to make sure they were managing their illness. If they were diabetic, were they managing their blood sugar the way they should? If they had congestive heart failure, were they watching their weight? Were they watching what they were eating? And those type of things. So that's the way that was our first approach at trying to solve this problem.
Yeah. So, what happened when they got out there and started meeting with these people?
It was a mixed result. On a lot of people, we had success, and we did have success in triaging the calls and trying to keep our units in service. We did a really good thing with the alternative response program. But the follow up with the patients, I think that we realized that these people had long term needs, more social needs than they really had medical needs. And that's kind of how we broke into uh, involving social work to begin with. We had heard about a program that the fire department had in Spokane, Washington, and Chief Williamson actually went to Spokane and talked with those people about it, and they had a pretty good partnership with a school there, and so we decided we would do the same thing. So we approached the University of Alabama School of Social Work about having social work interns actually do rotations with us on site at the fire department. And so that's what we did. We found out that the social workers could make a big difference.
So, as you're seeing that they're making a difference and it's working to a degree. So, at this point, you guys decide to take it a step further.
Right. Well, we tried a couple of different approaches. One, we were still thinking that we were going to be able to treat the people in their homes and avoid the transport to the hospital. So we came up with an idea to place a nurse practitioner on our trucks and send them on these low level calls. And we actually acquired some funding from the state to do this program. And we partnered with the university for that. And the university did hire a nurse practitioner, and they actually hired 2 social workers as case managers to do follow up. And so that lasted for a couple of years. And the nurse practitioner portion of that did not work out too well, just because we did not have the dispatch system in place to send that person first before we sent our other units. If we had had that, I believe it would have worked out better. But what did work very well was the case management follow up. And so when the funding ran out for the university program, I approached Chief Williamson, and of course, both of us agreed that this was something we needed to continue. And then we approached Chief Smith about it, who was very supportive. And we were able to convince the mayor and the council that we needed to hire full-time social workers. And so that's exactly what we did. We hired our first full-time social worker in 2019, and that was Brianna, whom you talked to on the last podcast. And Brianna was a licensed master's social worker, and she had been part of our intern program. Actually, she was probably in our second group of interns way back when we started the program, so she was very familiar with the program. She had worked for the action program as well, which was the partnership we had with the university. So she was the perfect person to get it started.
Yeah, yeah, she knew everything. You weren't coming in blindsided with a brand new program. Could you just backtracking a little bit when we talk about these calls that you're able to bring a nurse practitioner out or bring the paramedic out? Tell us about some of these calls because you think someone from outside of this that hasn't dealt with 911 calls or firefighters, you're thinking, oh, if they're calling 911, it's really got to be an emergency, right? So what are some of those calls you guys are receiving on a day-to-day basis that is that non-low acuity that you were talking about?
So believe it or not, people will call 911 for the most minor reasons. When we think about 911, we think about a heart attack, or we think about a major accident or trauma, or somebody's broken their arm, or somebody's fell down a flight of stairs or something like that. But a lot of times people call 911 because they have a fever, or because they are out of their medication, or because they stump their toe. I know that's crazy to think about, but they do. And we found out that a lot of times people do this because they don't have another option. Um, when we started getting involved on the social work side and trying to find out the nuts and bolts of why people call 911, we found out that a lot of times people just don't have another option. They don't have another option but to call 911. They don't have transportation. They don't have a family member that can take them to the doctor or take them to the hospital. They don't have enough money to pay for their medication and their food for that month, or their rent.
Yeah.
So they're in a situation where they really can't handle their problem by themselves. So the problem just continues to reoccur. And with us being firefighters, and we respond in the moment to fix what's wrong in the moment. And in that 5 minutes that we're with them, we want to make sure that they live and they get to the hospital. And so what happens is that we do that. We're very good at that. We get people there, they're to the hospital, they're doing very well. But what happens is when they get discharged from the hospital, they have all of these problems that are not solved, and they end up right back in the same shape that they were before they
Yeah.
went to the hospital very quickly. So that results in us being called back out to the same place for the same problem. So when you think about it, it behooves us, it helps us to do this
Yeah.
because it helps us keep our units in service for more serious calls. It prevents 911 calls. We have found out through the process of doing this that once our guys make a referral to EMS Prevention, we have found out that better than 90% of the time that person does not call 911 again.
Yeah, and that's huge.
That is huge. That
Mhm.
is a big difference. And we compare it to fire prevention. We compare it to, in the 1970s when we were having so many problems with fire, um, people were dying in house fires. There were a lot more house fires than we have now. That is when fire prevention was born, essentially, or when it really took off. That's why every fire department in the nation has a fire marshal's office. They have a fire marshal. They have fire investigators, because we make these codes to keep our businesses safe, to ensure safe practices so they won't have fire, and we prevent fires, and that helps the safety of the public. It also helps the safety of the firefighters when they're responding to these places. So fire prevention is very necessary. I don't think anybody would argue that at all. So what I'm saying now is that in 2024, our main problem is not fire.
Yeah, it was
We
effective. It worked,
we
right?
we 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 still have fire.
Of
We will
course.
always have fire.
Yes.
We will have fire from now until the end of time, because people make mistakes, and that's why we exist. We put out fires every day, and we will always do that. But fire prevention has done a good job of getting a handle on that, and more or less controlling that
Mhm.
to a certain degree. Today in 2024, our main concern is EMS, because like I said earlier, 80% of our calls are EMS, and probably 70% of those calls are these low acuity calls, the calls that we respond emergency to, that maybe we don't need to. We may go through that intersection with lights and sirens. We endanger the public unnecessarily, so to say, because the call's really not an emergency. And so we've tried to do a lot better job of triaging those calls so that we don't have to do that, and changing our response mode when we need to. And EMS prevention could be directly compared to fire prevention in that regard,
Yeah.
because what we're doing is we're identifying problems that are going to cause more problems in the future, and we're being proactive about it. Instead of going back to the station and just waiting for it to happen the next time, we are going out and actually trying to make a difference and finish up that call, so to say, and prevent it from happening again. And this helps with the safety of our firefighters. It helps with the safety of the community and improves community health. It does everything that fire prevention does. It's just on the EMS side.
Yeah.
So that's our main argument for having an EMS prevention division, is to do that. So why social workers? Well, because firefighters are not trained to deal with the social problems that these people have. We are trained to deal with emergencies, and we're very good at that. We are very good at handling people when they are at their worst and in their worst moments. We go in and we mitigate the situation, and we take control of it, and that's what we're trained to do. Long-term things, though, you guys, the social workers, you guys are trained to handle people's long-term issues.
Yes.
And so I think it's a natural partnership, and it is a, I think Mayor Maddox called it one time in a video, he called it a unique marriage of firefighting and social work. And I think that's a good way of putting it, because we have really found out that it's so beneficial to what we do.
Yeah.
It is pound for pound, I think it's one of the best things that we've ever done. So that's
Great.
why we do what we do. That's where we are, and we're learning more every day about how to do it and how to do it better.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you so much for being on with us. And we talked about Brianna, right? We're here now as EMS Prevention and as two social workers in the fire department. And so Brianna, who's been there kind of from the start, is going to be back on our next episode and kind of explain what all does EMS Prevention do now. So we know how we've led up to it, but where are we at now? What does the day-to-day look like and where we're headed? And so we look forward to you guys tuning in for our next episode.